Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to nearly 20,000 people watching us from the 40 different countries of the world today. It's Umur, digital transformation consultant for Insider. But instead of talking about myself, I'll be introducing my wonderful guest in a couple of seconds. In advance of starting, I would like to say that I'm very happy and excited to be with you at RESHAPE, the world's largest customer experience and growth summit, which will be held for the third time after pandemic. So today is the day. While there are dozens of different topics that I can moderate, I was extremely selfish and choose the topic of Web3, which I'm very interested in. Why I'm interested in that so much? Because especially in the last 20 years, technology has had a massive effect on the way people do business. So when we look at the marketing specifically, there have been three waves of technological advancement during this time. Web 2.0, social media, and now Web 3.0. During today's webinar, we will be focusing on Web 3.0 and what it means for customer engagement and experience. I'm pleased to have two guests with me. So I would like to introduce Deepak and Philip. Philip, we can start with you if you want. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, yeah, sure. So I'm Phillip Smith. I'm the Group Digital Director for KOJ Group. We operate multiple master franchisees and own concept brands, of which include Lego, Subway, and The Body Shop.
And Deepak, let's get
Yes,
to know
hi.
you.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. My name is Deepak Subramanian. I work for Unilever, where I've worked for the last 27 years, and currently I'm the Executive Director and General Manager of the Home Care business for South Asia. I am also part of the Global Advisory Board for the world's first Web3 Marketing Association.
Great to host you guys today. We have around 40 minutes. So I have great questions to ask you. So I would like to start with Philip, if you don't mind, Philip. How would you explain that Web3 is to someone who has never heard about it?
So Web3 is like an evolution or new iteration of the internet. If you look back in the 90s, Web 1 was basically the introduction of the internet into the public domain. In the mid 2000s, we had the uprising of social media and the blogosphere, and that kind of started Web 2. But now we're kind of at that crossroad with Web 3. Now Web 3 basically umbrellas lots of different components of blockchain technologies, blockchain itself, cryptocurrencies, non-fungible tokens, smart contracts, decentralized finance, DAOs, there's lots in there to unpack. Now there's basically two, what I would say, kind of like game-changing elements to Web 3, which are different to Web 2 and Web 1. So the first one is digital ownership. So basically, you can prove who owns a piece of digital media, or maybe a digital currency, or even your data or identity. So it's the first time we've ever really had a solid piece of technology which can validate who owns digital assets. Now the other part of this is basically the blockchain is permissionless. And what I mean by that, if you look at Web 2 at the moment, basically we give our media, we give our data to a very small bunch of companies, particularly in social media. And, you know, we have to ask for permission to access that, right? It's our media, it's our data, but we have to log in and at any time our accounts can be closed or frozen. And it's a bit like your bank account, right? If you've got money in your bank account, you need to ask permission from your bank to access that money. And at any time they can freeze your funds. But with Web3 and blockchain, basically you can have digital currency on there, you can have your digital media, you can have your data, your identity on there. And there's no person in between where you need to kind of ask permission to access it. So you can access the blockchain and your assets at any time. So this is what the game-changing part is, I suppose, is that it brings Web3 brings digital ownership and freedom, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And Deepak, as Philip mentioned, it's give kind of a freedom to the users on the Web3. But what are the main differences between Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3?
Yeah, so
for the
I
ones
think
who are watching us.
Yeah, to build on what Philip said, the way I like to think of it is Web 1. Think of all the websites that we used to access when we were young in the 90s, and you could just read You just read information. So it was really a read-only experience. I think the last 10, 15 years as Web 2 as it has evolved, all of us are now used to social media, and there is this added functionality. You can read, but you can also write. And I think that was, let's say, the big functionality that came up with Web 2. And as Philip said, Web 3, not only can you read, not only can you write, but you can also now have all some really amazing opportunities around ownership. And the way I try to, Philip touched upon this a little bit, the way I like to think of it, because there is a lot of jargon and there is a lot of technical stuff here. So the way I like to think about it is that everybody who's in a Web3 ecosystem, builders, creators, developers, they all get to own a piece of the system. Unlike, let's say, in Web 2, where a lot of the big tech companies used to pay the bills for the service, and in return, they gave us all fantastic products to use for free, which we all use to communicate, etc., etc. That gets turned completely on its head. And I just want to use the moment, therefore, to now introduce the concept of community and utility. I'll keep coming back to this through the rest of the session. But around this ownership thought that Philip talked about and that I'm also talking about, enabled by the technology, there are now some really amazing opportunities to bring a like-minded group of people together, a community, and start to create value around the thing that unites them, be it a passion, be it an interest. And that's where some of the next revenue models and new business models are going to be created.
All right. Beyond the content creators and influencers that you mentioned, so everybody wants to deep dive into this Web3, but what are the top industries that Web3 is becoming more prominent right now? Philip, maybe you would like to mention?
Yeah, sure. So I think the most mature is probably DeFi, so decentralized finance. The reason for that, it's had a longer period of time to mature because basically crypto has been, the headline since Satoshi released the first Bitcoin paper. So decentralized finance has kind of almost been driven by the cryptocurrency craze. But if we look a bit more up to date, kind of in the last 18 months, we're seeing more and more like gaming and retail come into the equation. I think with gaming, there's huge opportunities there. That's going to be a huge industry because people are very much used to buying, in-game assets, which they purchase, but at the moment they can't resell, right? So I think with gaming, we're going to see it develop so that basically with the rise of NFTs, people will be able to buy their assets in gaming, but also resell them later, and there'll be lots of different values on them. With retail, we've seen a lot more use cases coming in the last 12 months. The most obvious one is probably with Nike, their acquisition of Artifact or RTFKT, which happened in December. And we're going to see a lot more from retail. There's other use cases which we'll be mentioning throughout this presentation, but I think the metaverse as well. A lot of people are talking about that as almost like it's an industry. I don't think the metaverse is necessarily an industry, but there's going to be lots of industries operating within the metaverse, which on its own will kind of flourish. But yeah, there's lots of industries entering the space, particularly in the last sort of 12, 18 months.
Mm-hmm. But like you were mentioning about the metaverse, especially I have had a chance to watch one of the recording of Mark Zuckerberg regarding, maybe you watched it as well, regarding how metaverse will affect the way that the people will socialize and communicate between each other. So would you please tell us a bit more about like what Facebook is aiming for? With all these acquisitions of Oculus, and lately they've been competing with some other social medias as well. I would like to hear your voice about it.
Yeah, I think the approach Meta is taking is obviously, I think it's more of a Web 2 approach in the sense they're not building a decentralized metaverse. They've got billions of people in their ecosystem at the moment, and obviously they're going to be very keen to keep them in their ecosystem. And I suppose a natural iteration for them is building a metaverse that these billions of people can actually spend time within. What I would question is are we all really going to be sitting here with VR goggles on for long periods of time? Yes, in gaming, we already see that, but we might see examples of this maybe having a meeting with VR goggles on. But you got to question, as societies and culture, are we really going to be spending vast amounts of time in one metaverse with one company? Because we've got to remember that there's going to be lots of different metaverses that people are going to be building. There's going to be metaverses that are going to be specializing in certain industries or certain interests. So I think the approach Meta are taking is that everybody's going to be in their metaverse. They're going to be spending a lot of time in their metaverse, and they will be offering lots of different industries, lots of different interests within there. So yeah, I think they're going into Web3, maybe with a little bit of a Web2 approach.
Cool. One additional question, Philip. Like maybe I can ask to Deepak as well. Is it going to affect the way that we work right now? Because most of the people are watching us from their offices right now, and how it's going to affect the way that the people will work. That's why I'm like really curious about.
I think I'll come back to the metaverse maybe in a later bit, but I think if coming back to your specific question, I think AR, VR, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality technologies will, in my opinion, over the long term, will shape the way we work. I have no doubt on that because we're all spending time in front of a screen, but not in the current way it is today. I think we need wearable technologies now to get to a next level of development where it isn't very bulky, where there's a lot of friction today to access the metaverse with an Oculus headset. My head starts to hurt the moment I wear the Oculus headset for more than a few minutes. So I think in the long term it will, but we need to see the next generation of wearables coming through, where it could be as easy as this pair of glasses that you and me are wearing, which will allow us to have an augmented reality or a virtual reality experience.
Cool. Deepak, besides that, what are the top technologies used to Web3 area?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I'm going to take a bit of time to just walk through this because in my own learning journey, trying to understand Web3, there's just so much of jargon, so much of technical words that it's taken me a bit of a time to distill it into its core foundation. So I wanted to share with all the audience what I take out as the top technologies. I see three foundational technologies that are there in Web3. At the base of it, and Philip referred to this, is what is called the blockchain. As I told you, in Web 2, a lot of the data was stored in private databases, typically owned by the big tech companies. However, in Web 3, all the data around users, around transactions, are all stored in what are called public ledgers or public databases. It's visible to everybody. It's not kept in private vaults that only the owners of the Web 2 companies can access as it is today. And this is fully digital, often decentralized. And typically what happens is, as a new piece of data emerges, as a new transaction happens, you add a new block to that chain. The good part is that the user data is now no longer fragmented across platforms. Think of all of us. We have so many different usernames, passwords to access each of the different platforms that we use. The nice thing about leveraging the blockchain as a foundational technology is that the data is no longer fragmented across platforms. Neither are they proprietary, only owned by the owners. Us as users own our data, and nobody can put them up for sale, which are, I would say, the foundational points. So that's the first layer. On top of this comes a next layer of tech called smart contracts. Now, what are smart contracts? These are software programs that exist on the blockchain and which automatically execute a transaction the moment a certain set of predefined parameters are defined. This enables value transfer to happen without the need for a middleman. And I think that's at the heart of all the disintermediation that is happening in Web3. Philip spoke about decentralized finance. Why is decentralized finance becoming so hot? Because now you don't need a trusted authority in the middle to verify all the transactions. A smart contract can actually bring, let's say, an automated lending, for example. You can get the borrower and the lender together, and it can get easily executed. And as a result of it, fees on both sides are much lower for both the higher interest rates for the borrower, for the lender, and lower transaction costs for the lender. And then finally, so blockchain first layer, smart contract second layer. And then on top of this is a third layer called digital assets. And I think this is what we now tend to read a lot about in the media. These are pieces of code or data that signify ownership. There are many types of digital assets. And I'm just going to throw a couple of words without explaining them. Stable coins, NFTs, tokens, governance tokens, digital twins of real world physical items. Each one of these are different forms of digital assets that exist. So main thing is, if you ask me, what are the key technologies? 3 foundational layers: the blockchain, smart contracts, digital assets. When all of these 3 are put together, then you start to create some great utility for a community. And that is where you start to see decentralized finance, gaming, arts, media as all different industries where they're leveraging these technologies to create value. One thing I have to say, and Philip touched upon this also, I think the metaverse is often confused with Web3. The metaverse is not a Web3 exclusive experience. In fact, in decentralized finance, in gaming, in media, and in the arts, you can have the experiences that are provided is typically often called the metaverse. The metaverse can exist in a Web2 world also, exactly like what Philip said. These are basically immersive virtual experiences leveraging, augmented reality, virtual reality, or mixed reality technologies. But when those come into play in an ecosystem which is built on blockchain, smart contracts, and digital assets, then you have a Web3 expression of the metaverse. So I just wanted to separate for our users. Don't confuse the metaverse with Web3. The metaverse is just an immersive experience. It can happen in a Web2 environment. Think Oculus. It can happen in a Web3 environment, as I just explained. I hope this was simple and clear. This is my simplest way to explain it.
Yeah, for me, like, since I read a lot about this, Deepak, it was quite, explanatory for me. But for those companies, like coming from different industries, like travel, airlines, let it be retail, how they will make this transition from Web2 to Web3? Is it going to be a smooth transition?
I think it's a great question. And for me, I keep coming back to the 2 words that I used. The key thing in Web3 is you've got to flip. It requires a big mindset change. I think Philip talked about this also, and I think Meta is experiencing that right now. In Web3, as a brand owner, you have to feel comfortable to let go of the control of your brand. And when you let the community that you cater to take charge, and when you can create utility, leveraging blockchain, smart contracts, and digital assets, then you will start to see great use cases coming up. So brands that feel, or companies that feel comfortable passing the ownership on to the community, and who are obsessed with leveraging these technologies to create utility, will make a smooth transition. For the rest, you will hear a lot of jargon and a whole lot of LinkedIn marketing and a whole lot of PR hype, but you won't see too many sustaining cases, to be honest.
Yeah, cool. Philip, I would like to learn your opinion as well for this one, since you've been working with too many retail companies.
Yeah, I think companies that have been successful in Web 2, they've basically got Web 2 right. They've obviously got a bit of a head start, right? Because from Web 2 to Web 3, the way we build technology, the way we project manage, the way we build products, the way we run the operations is not going to change vastly from Web 2 to Web 3. So I think if brands have been successful in Web 2, they've got a bit of a head start. I think the biggest challenge with Web 3 is the use cases, because we're talking about use cases that were not technically possible before. These are use cases that didn't exist. So
what are those use cases? What can you give, like, a couple of examples to us?
Well, it's like the digital asset ownership with NFTs.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to sell a digital asset is a big game changer, because you could have right clicked and saved a photo before, mm-hmm. but you couldn't sell it because anybody could have done the same. But now you can actually, prove who owns a digital asset. It's a new commodity, right? And when the organization leaders kind of wake up and realize, hang on a minute, we've got completely new business models here that didn't exist before. That's when the race is going to start, right? And that's when companies are really going to start accelerating. And I think the companies that were successful in Web 2 will have a head start in that race. So it's going to be interesting to see.
But maybe a build on that, and Philip, also keen to get your view, is my reading a little bit is that some of the foundational elements of Web3, I feel, are going to put a real pressure on the business model of Web2 companies. And I just wanted, you're right that maybe there is a head start, but do you think Web2 companies will end up having maybe a bit of an existential question in that sense, because the core of their business model comes under pressure through some of the value opportunities that are there in Web3? Just curious to get your steer.
Yeah, I think it depends on what type of company it is, right? If you're a retailer and a retail brand, you know, I think you can pretty much transition into Web3 by offering new products. Whereas if you're a technology company where all your data is centralized, like you mentioned earlier, you know, on centralized servers, that's going to be a headache, right? Because all of a sudden you're going to have this competition come up who are doing things in a decentralized way, which actually might be more preferred by a business using that service or the consumer. So yeah, no, I think it's going to be interesting, and I think it depends, yeah, what industry you're in, how much it's going to disrupt you, I suppose. It's funny because Web 2 was always the disruptor, right? And then Web 2 tech companies are always a disruptor, but Web 3 is actually coming in and potentially going to disrupt all of the Web 2 technology companies. And it's why we're seeing with Meta, they're accelerating on their use cases. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see the disruptors being disrupted.
All right. Like, today we are in the RESHAPE, where we are talking about mostly the customer experience and customer engagement. I think it was a great start for the audience, that for them to understand like what Web3 is and what are the differences between the Web2 and Web1, and how the companies should react to Web2 to Web3 transition. But would you guys please let me know about what are the advantages of Web3 for like offering the CX leaders when it comes to offering the best possible experience? What will be the implication for Web3 for CX leaders? Philip, maybe you can start, and Deepak, we can get your opinion as well.
Sure.
Well, you know, CX leaders, they're really good at utilizing data and insight, right, to architect and build customer experiences. Now, they're heavily dependent on centralized data, like we spoke about, which is not permissionless, and they've got to ask permission from the tech companies to access it and pay money essentially to access it. I think with the blockchain, because it's essentially a public computer, right, and we can see what's happening in a lot more transparent way. So I think for CX leaders, it's going to get easier for them to access, you know, customer behavioral data without being dependent on the big tech companies. And I think, you know, if you look at a product being sold, if you sell a physical product in a store today, that physical product leaves your store and you've got no idea where it goes, what happens to it. If you sell a digital product, you can still track that product's life, you know, on the blockchain. So after you sell products, you can actually see what happens to them afterwards. And this has not been possible before. So I think for CX leaders, it's actually going to be a lot better, a lot easier, and a lot more transparent for them.
Deepak?
Yeah. I wanted, my big reflection is that there is a lot of technology and a lot of new models, new revenue and new business models that are going to come through. And that is true. I think the business model around Web 2 and Web 3 will be different. But from a CX point of view, never ever forget the importance of authentic content that stops, content that is arresting. And as Philip said also, I think what is really critical is to leverage some of the transparency and some of the trackability and traceability that is there in Web3 to really get the targeting right. So I would say there's an even more important moment now where when you create a community of like-minded people who come together in a Web3 ecosystem, who own a share of that, in my opinion, the bar on content and the bar on connecting with them in a very authentic way actually goes up even higher. And I think that's one of the important aspects that I'd like to stress for a whole lot of CX leaders.
Mm-hmm. the number of channels also for those users are like getting increased over the years. We've been starting with the email, like later on the SMS, then the new channels came into our lives, right? The mobile applications and all these communication channels. So Philip, how do you think the implications of Web3 will trickle down into other channels like mobile apps, WhatsApp, Telegram, and others? Would you please tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, I think, you know, existing channels are going to need to figure out how do they integrate with Web3, right? I think there's two aspects here. So Deepak mentioned community earlier. You know, Web3 is very much based around community. And communities are really strong when they congregate around the brand or a project. So we're going to be, if you think in a, say, retailer or brand context, you're not going to be having so much of a one-to-one conversation with customers. You will still have one-to-one conversations, but you're also going to be having like a conversation from you to a community, where you've got a community listening to what you're saying, because they might have invested in your products or your services or basically your project. So I think we're going to, you know, these communication tools really need to think about community management in a lot deeper way, and how do they evolve from being a one-to-one communication channel to enabling people to talk more as a community. So that's the first aspect. The other aspect is digital wallets. Now, it sounds like I'm going off topic here, but bear with me, I'm not. I think when digital currencies from central banks are implemented, so when we get a digital dollar, a digital pound, a digital dirham, I think the adoption of digital wallets is going to explode, right? So huge amount of people are going to have digital wallets. Now, people will be using those wallets, those, let's say, Web3 wallets, for lots of different things, not just for transactions. They're going to be using them to store their digital assets. They're going to be using them to verify data. They're going to be using them to log into things. So I think, you know, when we see this explosion of digital wallets, communication channels as well need to understand how do we interact with those digital wallets, because they're going to be kind of like a real centerpiece to people's Web3 lives. Now, we've seen one very basic example of it with Twitter at the beginning of the year. So basically, if you had an NFT profile picture on Twitter, if you connected your digital wallet to your Twitter account, then that profile picture turned into a hexagon, so that people could see, okay, they genuinely own this NFT, and you're the one who owns that digital asset. It was kind of like a validation or some kind of you know, almost like a authenticator, so people could see that you actually own that digital asset. So I think, you know, people connecting their digital wallet to do lots of different things in their lives is going to be a really big thing.
Do you also believe that, maybe it can be a bit out of topic, but do you think the boom of super apps are kind of related with that? Especially in China, what we have seen like over the last couple of years, the super apps are booming, and also same in the EMEA also. Maybe you work on like a couple of projects, right?
Do you know what? There's this meme that I've seen, which is actually really kind of encapsulates where we're heading with this, and where we're heading with, say, like the Web2 apps. But it's hard to explain a meme, but I'll try. Basically, it says Web 1, you sign in with your email and password. Web 2, you sign in with Google, you sign in with Facebook, or you sign in with Twitter. Web 3 is going to be Connect Wallet. So people are going to be, you know, using their wallet as the center point and the source of truth for everything they do. So they won't necessarily use just Google or Facebook to log into things, and because they're going to have their assets in these wallets. So every time they want to do a transaction, every time they want to access their assets, they can do it quickly and easily. And if you look on Ethereum with Ethereum name service, So you've got the .f domains. Right now, you can connect all of your Web2 stuff to those, whether it be emails, websites, your digital assets. So people will have a kind of blockchain identity, which everything is linked to. And I think including in that will be, the communication channels, like you say, WhatsApp, WeChat, whatever it might be. They will be connected to that wallet as one of their channels, not so much that channel being their centerpiece.
Sure, it's going to be kind of super.
It's almost like having it's almost like
Yeah.
having an aggregator for your entire digital life. That's what it's going to be like.
Indeed. Deepak, I would like to ask you, okay, you were mentioning about 3 layers. What is the difference between Meta and Web3? But there are also some other things, right? People are getting confused, like NFTs, DAOs, DeFi. It's really getting confusing. So what's the difference between them? Would you please mention us?
Yeah, so you said NFT, DAOs, and DeFi. So maybe I try to link it back to my three layers. So we said blockchain, smart contract, digital assets, the foundational 3 layers of a Web3 system. And on top of that, you have applications, decentralized finance, art, media, gaming, etc. So NFTs is actually a type of a digital asset. The 3rd layer, the digital asset, NFT is one amongst them. I spoke to you about that. There are 4-5 different kinds of digital assets. And NFT stands for non-fungible token. Complicated word, but what it simply means is that you can't replicate it. And think of money. Money is fungible. So my $1 and your $1 note can be used interchangeably. Non-fungible means you can't do that. It in a way means my $1 is different from your $1. And basically that enables to build rarity, scarcity, and create value. So that's basically what NFTs is. DAO stands for decentralized autonomous organization, and that relates to the 2nd layer of what I said. Remember, I said blockchain and smart contracts. Now, DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations, are a governance setup where the community that is coming together. Remember, I told you that a community of like-minded users or like-minded organizations come together. They can create something called a DAO, where this group, the community, decides in a very decentralized way what are the rules and what are the parameters on the basis of which the smart contract is going to be executed. In today's world, you have central authorities, a bank, for example, that determines the rules on the basis of which money will be borrowed and money will be lent and what interest rates we're going to charge. Imagine now when you don't have these centralized bodies or authorities governing the flow of value and the flow of transactions, then the community takes over. And the DAO is a very interesting way of governance where people vote based on their ownership. So higher ownership means obviously a bigger stake in the vote. And people vote saying, who do we lend to? What interest rate can we charge? On what conditions will this contract be executed? So I think that's the way DAOs work. And DeFi, decentralized finance, actually relates to the application on top. So I said blockchain, smart contracts, and digital assets, the foundational elements. DeFi, or decentralized finance, is basically one of the use cases. Philip also spoke about it. I think one of the best cases that I'm seeing today is what I spoke about earlier, automated lending, where you have smart contract based rules which determine how the borrower and how the lender will come together, and the disintermediation happens. There's nobody in the middle. Borrowing costs come down, interest costs go up, simply because of the use of technology to facilitate this transaction, and real time, 24/7.
Great. While having all these like terms, by the way, it's my personal curiosity that I don't know who is bringing all these terms into our lives, especially in the last 10 years, like NFTs, DAOs, like DeFi. Someone is thinking like while they are eating something and just bringing out all these terms. But yeah, that's really amazing that how the world is.
By the way, my hope. Sorry to interrupt, since you said and since you asked this fantastic question, saying what's the implication for CX leaders. My real hope is, and we are not there as yet, but my real hope is that the day comes not very soon from now, where consumers can have a consumer experience without even knowing that they are in a Web3 context. That's when it will become seamless, and that's when the adoption is very high. And all this fancy, complicated stuff happens in the background. But for the consumer, it's just enabling really more immersive, more exciting opportunities of engagement without really worrying about what's the technology powering it behind.
Yeah, I think a lot of the terms we're using today are pretty technical, and they're more industry terms, right? So if you work in an industry which is going to be affected by Web3, as a professional, you need to learn what they are and understand at least at a high level what they mean to make sure that you can evolve as a business. But from a consumer point of view, who knows what these things are going to be called. If you look back in the early 2000s, we used to use the word internet a lot. You say internet shopping, but the consumer kind of decided, well, I prefer the word online. So we all started saying online shopping.
It became e-commerce.
Yeah,
suddenly, right?
yeah, and then e-commerce come along. In the early 2000s, even people in the industry weren't even using e-commerce. It was like, so I just, a lot of these terms. If you look at an NFT, a non-fungible token, all the person needs to know is they own a digital asset. That digital asset ownership will probably be called something by the brand that sold it to them. And maybe the consumers will come up with their own generic terminology, a bit like I said, of online. And it's the same with DAOs. Like I'm a member of various DAOs, but it's because I'm a bit of a Web3 geek. But really from the consumer's point of view, they'll be interacting with businesses that are run under a DAO framework, but they won't necessarily know they're buying from a business that's operating as a DAO. So I think, it's going to be really interesting to see how all these terms and phrases kind of translate into consumer-friendly phrases and terms.
But like we talked about these technology creators and the brands, but there is some end users and the consumers, right? And what the regulators have to say about it when it comes to the end user, the consumers, Philip?
Well, until now, it's not been a lot, because basically they're figuring it out, right? They're working really hard to try and catch up. There's a lot of grey areas still. There's been a huge amount of grey areas around how you sell digital assets. Should some of these be classed as a security, a bit like a bond or a stock? There's been lots of chatter in the communities about that and what the regulators are going to do. But if we look back at, say, e-commerce, for instance, and I'm going to reference to the UK because that's where I sort of derived from in the industry. But back in 2001, there was consumer regulation put in for online shopping. Now, the new regulation didn't get significantly updated till 2014 when the EU Consumer Rights Directive came in. Now, if you imagine from 2001 to 2014, how much had changed in online shopping and the development, and Web2 came around and all of these things. And then the regulation took like 13 years to update. I think the challenge the regulators are going to have really is in Web3 is, one, it's going to be a lot more complex. It's going to be a lot more complex than Web2. And secondly, they're going to have to update regulation probably at least every 5 years just to even almost keep up. So, the regulators are not saying a lot at the moment because they're figuring it out. When they do begin to put regulation in place, it's still in some jurisdictions, it still might be 2, 3, 4 years away. But I think what's going to be the challenge is once they put the first set of regulation in place, that is very quickly going to go out of date, and then they need to update it pretty quick. They can't be waiting 13 years again to update it. So it's going to be interesting to see what regulation they put in place and how quickly they can keep up with the changes of Web3, which are going to be pretty fast.
Is it something related with the layer that you said, Deepak, like the digital contract part? Because I've been working with many companies, like as a consulting, and we've been updating all these regulations, as Philip mentioned, all these GDPR documentation and everything over the last 5 years. But still, as Philip mentioned, like how it's gonna change, like in terms of these regulations, and is it something related with those layers that you mentioned?
To some extent, yes. I think at the heart of it, regulation by nature is centralized. It's somebody setting the rules. And then we, of course, have at the heart of Web3 is a community and a like-minded group of people who come and say, this is how we want to work and this is how we want to settle value. So I think that is where, like you have between Web2 and Web3, at a very core fundamental level, some opposing forces. I think that is at the heart of why it is taking so long for governments to figure out what to do. I think we do need some regulation. It's not clear, for example, smart contracts, if they are violated, how will that be sorted out? And I think that there will need to be some regulation, but it is taking time because it's quite existential in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the grey, sorry, just to add an example on you know, the sales and metaverse land are quite a grey area, in the sense that, you know, if a project is selling you a piece of land which they haven't built yet, right? So they sell you an NFT. They're saying, right, you're going to have a plot of land in this metaverse. So they sell you that NFT for this plot of land. Now the return on that is dependent on the team doing what they're saying they're going to do. So people are buying into that project, giving the team their money to basically execute. Now, when you look at that model, that's actually a security, right? So whoever's selling that metaverse land should actually probably be registered with the securities and assets regulators, because they're essentially selling a security. But if you look at it from a consumer point of view and let's say a retail point of view, it actually doesn't feel like that, like you're buying a security. So it's really grey, and there's going to be loads of use cases coming out over the next couple of years which are going to be sitting in that grey area. And basically the people selling this stuff are going to have to work closely with the regulators to know if they're on the wrong or right side of the law. That's where we're going to be.
Yeah. What I recently recognized is almost half of Istanbul has been sold on on metaverse. So I just seen that like on a couple of apps. So I don't know if you oversee, but yeah, that was one of my experience. Like last month, I checked and half of Istanbul has been sold. So Deepak, I'm gonna ask you how brands are experimenting with Web3 right now. I know that there are some examples, and the brands are already started. Yeah. Maybe you can give some.
I think there are lots of experiments going on. I haven't seen too much of a mass scale application. Lots of experiments going on, but I have to say with individual components of the technologies. Remember, I told you 3 layers of the technology. Many brands are experimenting with components of them. I would love to see one. I don't think I have seen as yet one scale mass play with all the 3 technologies fully integrated, at least let's say in the consumer experience aspect. There are many aspects in enterprise and B2B applications. So I think the NBA Top Shot, some of you in the audience who are interested, you might want to Google this and have a look at it. The NBA Top Shot program was very interesting, where they using NFT technologies, they created collectibles around players and around moments in the NBA. Which, of course, if you talk about community and utility, great case, because the community of basketball diehard fans who want to own something about their role model players, or own an important moment in a pivotal basketball match. Think Michael Jordan in the 1997 NBA final. That they have done really, really well. I see a couple of cases where celebrities start to monetize their fans. So Snoop Dogg entering Decentraland, for example, and creating a space there where he can engage with his fans directly is another application. I see a lot of experimentation of brands saying that they're doing something in the metaverse, but I would caution, again, coming back to the original part, that a brand doing an action in the metaverse, for example, doing an in-game experience in Fortnite or in Roblox or whatever else, those are not necessarily Web3 applications, as I said, unless they're combined with the underlying technology. So I just repeat that again. But I would love to see a lot more experiments, and everybody's looking to Starbucks right now, because Starbucks has just announced what they call a loyalty card, which is enabled by some of the Web3 technologies. And I think that is yet, I'm also searching for a couple of details to understand how that's going to work, but that might very well be the first mass global use case of an NFT technology, of a Web3 technology. So watch the space for more.
Mm-hmm. I heard that like Starbucks, like points have been exited, the credit card points lately in States. So that makes sense for them to invest into these new technologies. Do you have any, Flip? Any examples?
Yeah, I think there's, quite a few experiments happened, particularly in the last 12 months. With digital wearables, Nike and Adidas have gone in quite heavy there. If you look at Nike, they've actually generated around $200 million in sales and after sales of their Clone X community. And these are some big brands, taking some big gambles, I suppose. You've also got like luxury. So if you look at the example of Tiffany, what they done, they kind of took a different approach, and they said to CryptoPunk holders, CryptoPunks are like one of the original NFT collections. They're worth a lot of money. They're worth over like $100,000 at least. And Tiffany basically went to the CryptoPunk holders and said, look, you're the only ones who can buy this NFT from us. At the time, I think it was around sort of $40,000, $50,000 to buy this NFT. And if you buy this NFT from us, we will then make you a bespoke piece of jewelry from Tiffany based on your punk. And it was really successful. People were spending $40,000, $50,000 on this NFT from Tiffany to get the real life jewelry from NFT of their CryptoPunks. So there's been lots of different experiments. I think what's going to be interesting is, well, like Deepak said, Starbucks is highly likely going to be one of the biggest NFT rollouts globally, because they've got the resources, the means, the customer to do that. But what's going to be interesting is what Web3 native brands go global, and what Web3 native brands actually help with mass adoption. One of the reasons I'm a Doodles holder and in that community is because they're taking an entertainment approach where, their CEO is the ex-CEO of Billboard. They brought in Pharrell Williams as their brand director. And basically they want to onboard millions of people into Web3 via their Doodles project, but that is going to be through music, entertainment, and lots of other things going on. So we're going to have kind of like, traditional brands like Starbucks kind of accelerating, globally with maybe their loyalty program. At the same time, we're going to be seeing, Web3 native brands like Doodles or even VeeFriends, which is Gary Vee's collection. He gives their holders a lot of real life products and utility. I think it's going to be interesting to see what Web3 brands kind of rise up and help with mass adoption and become the new brands of the future, basically.
Yeah, amazing to hear that. It's so exciting. When it comes to like your experience, like I have learned too many things like from our conversation, but for the audience, what would you advise? Like, how do they get involved into this Web3 technologies, and how they can increase their knowledge? Do you advise anything for them?
Yeah, maybe I can go first. And I think there is a lot to read. So and in a strange way, I spend a lot of my time reading, but it's becoming actually even more technical. And I think where for me the value comes is then building a network of people whom I can speak to, and try to then demystify some of this and ask some of the obvious questions, saying, so if this happens, then what could happen thereafter? And maybe I therefore take the opportunity just to say a word about the Web3 Marketing Association, which I had introduced at the start. So this is the world's first Web3 Marketing Association, W3MA. Your audience can go in and check it out. Mm-hmm. We're early in our foundational years, but we are a group of 7-8 people with a lot of industry experience on the client side, on the agency side, on the brand side, who said that, listen, we all stumbled upon Web2 on our own ways, based on our own experiences, based on where we were at that particular point in time. And we all feel quite strongly, coming to your point, Umur, that we must create the platform for marketeers at large to be able to learn about Web3 in a frictionless way. So we are setting this not-for-profit organization up, which will build an agency marketplace, a talent marketplace, and a community of practice. So that would be one moment I do my own advertising campaign for the W3MA and to your audience. Just to
no, that's a great initiative, Deepak. Really, like
watch this space, and hopefully sure some really nice content and some nice thought leadership comes out of it, which you'll all find useful.
Cool, great. Philip, do you advise anything else?
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag, actually, in terms of how you learn about Web3 right now. There's not necessarily one go-to place. When I first started learning about Web3 sort of 18 months, nearly 2 years ago, basically all you had was crypto Twitter and NFT Twitter to kind of get as much information as possible, being within the Twitter community. And that is still a very good source, actually, Twitter, not just about crypto and NFTs, but Web3 in general. But I think, a lot of people are going to, by default, go to LinkedIn because that's the professional network that they know, and they're going to want to follow people on LinkedIn. I'm finding LinkedIn at the moment, though, is very much a lot of people just copying and pasting news, copy and pasting Web3 news. They're not necessarily adding a lot of value to the conversation. But so if you're going to look on LinkedIn, try and follow people who are actually building in Web3 or running projects in Web3, because they're obviously the more experienced. But one of the places I've learned the most is actually in some of the communities that I've entered by buying an NFT. And I'm not talking about some big expensive NFT. There's quite a lot of communities out there where you can buy NFTs for like a few $100s. There'd be hundreds or thousands of people in those communities.
Just to experience it, right? Just to experience that.
Yeah. The thing is, because you've got hundreds or thousands of people in that community. It will be within a closed group it might be on Telegram, WhatsApp, or Discord. But you don't only listen to those people. You can actually ask a lot of questions. So if you've got questions and you might not want to publicly ask it on an open platform, you can ask people in that community, and people are always really helpful. There's always like people in there with lots of experience. So getting involved in communities like Web3 communities, you can learn a lot really fast. I've done my own learning over the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, and the one thing you cannot get away from is you've got to upskill yourself into Web3. There's no one's going to do it for you, so you really need to upskill yourself. I'm doing a free intro to Web3 course and the reason I'm doing it for free is because I believe people need to understand the basics of Web3 for them to then further upskill themselves. So I think you need to be prepared, like Deepak said, to read a lot across a lot of different platforms, spend a lot of time. You can't learn it in 5 minutes, and you need to be willing to keep upskilling yourself. And I think if you do work in industries like marketing, like retail, you really need to get to grips with it quickly, because Web3 is going to come a lot faster, a lot harder to your business than Web2 ever did. So I think, it's a real mixed bag at the moment, but you got to start right and start somewhere.
You mentioned like two channels in the very beginning, the LinkedIn and the Twitter. Is it easy to find you on Twitter and follow you, Philip?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is LXXX_F. It's Roman numerals for 80. That was the year I was born. Probably shouldn't make it that obvious. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. Obviously on LinkedIn, Phillip Smith from KOJ Group. But I think Twitter and LinkedIn are very different in what you learn and the way that information is presented. But you can find a lot of value in both if you look in the right direction.
All right, cool. So are you like a ghost user, or you like to retweet as well? because
So,
many of
sorry,
the
am I?
people are like just many of the people are just like ghost users on Twitter. They do not like anything, they do not retweet, but they just read. So
Yeah, no, I am active on Twitter, and you find in Web3 people are really active on Twitter. I think the Web3 community is
that's
the only thing
yeah.
keeping Twitter going right now, to be honest.
Indeed,
So
I
yeah,
agree.
no, there's a lot of activity, and that's why I'm saying you can learn a lot. The culture is very different on Web3 Twitter to what it is on LinkedIn. You have to kind of have almost like two faces when you're on the two different platforms. But yeah, no, you can learn a lot.
Yeah, I don't know how many NFTs, the monkeys, different type of monkeys I have seen over the last 12 months on Twitter. So yeah.
Yeah, well, we're seeing more of those pictures on LinkedIn these days. My LinkedIn is actually a bit of a doodle. So yeah, it's creeping over into the traditional Web2 channels.
Oh, that's sweet. Um, as you know, like this year, the Reshape stands for crafting a new way of customer experience to become a purpose-led partner into our customer lives. What does this mean for your brands? Maybe you can mention Deepak.
Yeah, as I said earlier, more immersive, more natural, more authentic, not very forced and not very not interruptive. I give you an example. Since we're talking about Web3 and on the sidelines of Reshape, gaming is going to be, in my opinion, one of the big industries that is going to explode. It's already going very fast. I think over this decade you will see gaming exploding, and I think Web3 will help to drive that explosion also, I believe. But in gaming, brands cannot behave like they behave outside of gaming. In a gaming environment, you don't want to interrupt, and therefore, how do you build the right content? How do you seamlessly integrate into the audience, into the environment? I think is really, really critical. So I think that's what it really means for me, let's say, as a practicing brand marketer. And number two is data and analytics has always been at the core of customer experience, CX, and how do we leverage the traceability and trackability of Web3 to take it to a whole new level, creating utility for a community. I think that's for me the dominant thought that is coming through as we look to see how does the CX, how do CX leaders evolve in a Web3 context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe Philip, I can ask you the last question before I will summarize and end this amazing session. What is the biggest learning or advice you would like to share with the CX community today?
It kind of goes back to the learning. So, the consumer isn't there yet. We don't have mass market consumers, buying Web3 products. There's very, very few consumers, buying digital assets, etc. And that's a luxury for us right now as an individual, as a business, and as an industry, because it gives us time to learn and upskill and figure out the use cases, figure out what we need to do. So the best thing you can do right now while the consumer isn't ready is basically upskill yourself into the different components of Web3. I can't stress it enough, because this is a luxury time, and when the consumer does catch up, you're probably not going to have time and you'll be on the back foot. So take advantage of this time, understand what the different components are, figure out what components are relevant for you, your business, your industry, even your career. And then deep dive into those components. You can't be an expert on all components of Web3. None of us will be, but the people who understand what components are going to be relevant to their business or to them as an individual will be able to deep dive and learn more. So I can't stress it enough. Just upskill into Web3 today and figure out what the components are relevant to you.
Great. Deepak, would you like to add anything else?
Yes, I think Philip said it very well, and I just add one nuance to it: beware of the hype, because things are very underdeveloped. You have this Gartner the hype cycle that goes through. I think a lot of this around Web3, and I think for the next couple of years is going to be in a hype cycle. And I think that is where the learning and the thinking needs to be guided through. What is so unique about this technology? How is it going to create utility for a community? That's the question we have to keep asking. And if you're not able to see it fully, you can be more or less sure that at the moment it's a hype, and it might fade away.
And don't get distracted by buzzwords like metaverse.
Yeah, a good advice. Yeah, it's a decentralized feature, everyone. So Web3 is a young and evolving ecosystem. We learned a lot today. As like Gavin Wood coined the term in 2014, many of these ideas have only recently become a reality, I guess. So in the last year alone, there has been a considerable surge in the interest in cryptocurrencies, improvement to layer 2, scaling solutions like massive experiments with the new forms of governance and evolutions in digital identity. I still think that we are only at the beginning of creating a better web with the Web3. But as we continue to improve the infrastructure that will support it, the future of web looks bright, in my opinion. How we can get involved? As Phillip and Deepak mentioned today, we can find a community. We can explore the Web3 applications, join a decentralized organization like Build on Web3 and get a wallet and join into different community accounts, as Phillip mentioned. So thank you everyone for attending today's session, and thank you Phillip and Deepak. It was great to learn from you, with two most experienced people in this industry. So have a great day and have a great next session on RESHAPE. So see you.
Thank you, Umur. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Deepak.